Thanks, Fred. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce two of our newest members, Phyllis Cole and Kathy Ellis Kelemen, who calls herself Kathy EK. They are going to speak to us this morning about some transformative events in their lives, or people they've met, or something about their lives that affected them, and talk a little bit about how their identity and values may have changed because of those events. They're bravely allowing us to get to know them beyond the surface level. But first, this annual presentation has been a long-standing ICL tradition. And before I start, I want to acknowledge member Don Gallagher. Don? Wait. Don! I want to tell you a little bit about Don in the background. He joined ICL in 2004. Don joined ICL in 2004, and since then he has served ICL on committees, just everything I can think of, and he's provided wisdom and guidance through being on the board. In 2006, he decided to start Up Close and Personal with Sharon Wright. I don't know if Sharon's here today, but hi, Sharon, thank you. Let's acknowledge Sharon and Don. Could y'all stand? Thank you. Our first presenter today is Phyllis Cole. Phyllis has been an ICL member since January. She lived on a farm off of Kubler Road for the first few years of her life. Then she and her family moved to Palo Alto, California, where she eventually attended Stanford University and earned a degree in communications and specializing in film production. She moved back to Portland and Oregon and served in several different administrative positions for nonprofits and other organizations, but eventually she landed at Metro, the Office of Metro in Portland, working for the cemetery office, and served there for many years up to her retirement in 2016. She and her husband, Vern Severson, who's right here, hi Vern, moved to Salem in 2019. She has traveled all over the world, Singapore, Toronto, England, Portugal, and all over the United States. She and Vern chose not to have children, but they have lived with many, many wonderful cats. And currently, because they moved to a neighborhood that's not cat-friendly, they now have a little dog named Frida, who they adore. She may tell us a little bit about her participation with the Center 50 Plus, because she has been critical to that organization and has done volunteer work for them, and it's helped her to engage with the community. She also meets every week to paint abstract acrylics. She's an artist. Please join me in welcoming Phyllis Cole.
Well, hello, everyone. I was going to introduce Vern and have him turn around and wave, but Ann already introduced him. But I want to say a special thank you to Gwen Ellen for all the help that she gave to me in this presentation. And since I didn't mention it in my presentation, I'll say a word first about Center 50. It's an incredible organization, as many of you know, I attend the Cup of Joe fundraiser every year to be able to add to my support for them because I think it's an incredibly important place. So, all that said, as I grow older, I realize more and more what great parents I had. But today I'm going to talk about some of the special gifts that I received from my father. By virtue of his enthusiastic nature and sometimes eccentric choices, he provided me with a framework of compassion, amusement, and optimism that I have been happy to take into my adult life. You'll see photos of some of my paintings when I couldn't find a photo that matched the anecdote. I didn't start painting until he'd been gone for a long time, but I know he would have rejoiced in the joy that I take in working with color and shape. Elbert Charles Cole, Jr., of English stock, and mostly known as Mole, and Marjorie Rotema, of Finnish stock, and mostly known as Margie, met at the Chicago PX in July of 1943. He had just arrived prior to be shipping out for a tour of duty in England as a certified bomb disposal officer. He came into the PX to replenish his stock of personal items. She was working at the counter. After he finished shopping, he came up and said, "Well, I found everything, but I couldn't find any toothpaste." And she said, "Yes, I know, I have it behind the counter. That's because you have to give me your empty tube first." And he said, "But I just shipped in. I don't have an empty tube." She said, "Well, no toothpaste for you." And they went back and forth like this for a while, and finally he said, "Listen, I came in to get a tube of toothpaste, and I'm not leaving until I get a tube of toothpaste." And she narrowed her eyes and looked at him and said, "Better men than you have tried." And you know what's funny? I know this story, obviously, but I don't know whether he ever got the toothpaste. They weren't talking. So they married on August 7th, after a courtship of 5 Friday night dates. It was World War II, and he told her that they didn't know each other well enough to get engaged, so they should just get married. Aries and Scorpio. And for you interested in this sort of thing, it's probably clear that my father was the Aries, like me. He taught a bomb disposal certification program to more than 700 military personnel. He helped save lives. And I don't know if this is him in the hole, but I do know that he survived the war. Here we are after the war. Emily on the left, Katie on the right, and me in utero, definitely present to my mother, but not visible to the rest of the family. Our family kept moving west. My mother had my sisters in Massachusetts and Minnesota, and I showed up in Idaho. We ended up in Salem. Oops. We ended up in Salem, where for some reason we made the paper. I don't know, it was a smaller town then, maybe just by moving in. That's me on the left. And this reminds me of a verse that some of you may also remember. "You may have tangible wealth untold, caskets of jewels and coffers of gold. Richer than I, you can never be. I had a mother who read to me." We always had books, and because of her, I've been a lifelong reader. A final move took us to Palo Alto, California in 1955 because my father simply could not make peace with the rain. I got a bit older and became one of those horse girls. Books about horses. I read King of the Wind at least 30 times, horse statues, and a paper horse herd. We traced, colored, and cut the horses out. I brought Sun Devil and Pied Piper here to prove they really exist. I found the horse herd a couple of weeks ago. And every year, for my birthday and Christmas, I asked for a real horse of my very own, and I was merciless in my pleading. In my early teens, my father finally sat me down and said, "Phyllis, if it were at all possible, we would buy you your very own horse, but financially, it can't happen. It's not ever going to happen, and we're really sorry." So I heard him, and I stopped asking, and I was okay with it. So here are the three Cole girls as teenagers: Emily, Katie, and me. I'm probably still in my horse phase, just prior to going into my boy phase. And in later years, I'm still me. Emily is now Gin Chunzin, a Buddhist nun for 21 years, and our sister Katie passed in 2016. My memory is annoyingly selective. A classic example: in 7th or 8th grade, I played alto sax in my high school concert band. We'd been rehearsing for months for the big end of concert performance. It was a really big deal. Off-site, big deal. Well, I'm relaxing one Saturday afternoon, probably reading a book, and when I jump in shock and yell, "Daddy, the concert is today, in 45 minutes. So we jump up, go to the car and zoom to the school. Somehow we find a janitor. He lets us in. I get my instrument, put on my uniform, and zoom to the venue. I slide into my chair just as the baton rises. I've been lucky in some of these events. So clearly, I can forget important stuff, but some memories of my father remain so very clear 23 years after his death. He was an innocent. He was very trusting and could never understand why anyone would want to lie to him. This drove my Scorpio mother nuts, who could easily imagine why. In 1961, he heard that space aliens had taken over Coalinga, a small town in California near Fresno. It was being covered up to prevent wholesale panic. Our family was driving to Guaymas, Mexico for Christmas camping on the beach, and we decided to stop in Coalinga on the way and check out this sub-rosa alien invasion. I was 10 years old. We parked on a downtown street, and he asked if someone would like to get out and discreetly scout around for anything unusual. I was all, "Ooh, ooh, pick me, pick me." And since neither my mother or sisters wanted anything to do with it, I was out of the car in a flash. I walked up and down the normal-looking main street, always in sight of the car, checking out shop windows and looking for weird activity of any kind. I struck up a conversation with some friendly people, and after a bit of pleasant chit-chat, casually asked if they knew anything about space aliens in the area. They didn't panic or look disturbed or sneaky. They just very politely said they hadn't heard anything about that at all. Those aliens were really good actors. A coworker told him later that they were just kidding him about Coalinga, but this never stopped him from believing in the ultimate goodness of people. My parents were big Stanford football fans. Before every home game, they would set up a tailgate feast beneath a certain giant oak in a field by the stadium, eat and drink with friends, and then go to the game. My mother had found my father the ultimate Stanford pants. They were polyester and vibrant in Stanford's red and white, bold with stripes and lots of paisley. They were a garishly outlandish homage to Stanford University, and my father loved them. He wore them to every home game. One game day, the tailgate was going strong when a young man walked by and stopped short when he saw my father in the pants. He couldn't get over them. They were perfect. They were the most beautiful pants in the entire world. After he'd gone on like this for a bit, my father, completely caught up by the guy's enthusiasm, dropped trow on the spot and presented him with the pants. No worries, my mother came up with a pair of sweatpants from the car, and the young man floated off, hardly believing his good luck in coming across such a kind and extravagantly generous stranger. A few weeks later in the season, the San Francisco Chronicle ran an article which referred to this fellow as the ultimate fan, and he's wearing the pants. I remember my father telling us girls to never treat anyone who waited on us like an automated menu, that these are people just like you and me. I have a great photo somewhere that I couldn't find of my father and a luggage coordinator outside the terminal door at the San Francisco airport, with whom he just enjoyed a wonderful conversation about life and the universe. He asked my mother to take a photo so he could always remember the wonderful chat they'd had. And he also taught us that practical jokes are really just about masking cruelty and calling it humor, that they are not humor and they are not funny, not ever. My father was a scientist, a paint chemist, who formulated many different paint products during his career. And he could color match and mix paint by eye, which is a very rare skill. One day his boss told him a new client wanted a paint that could withstand very high temperatures, so he invented one. The order shipped, and the client loved it. When the client placed a much larger second order, he got curious and asked his boss what the product was being used for. When he found out that it was for the napalm bombs that our country was dropping on Vietnam, he refused flatly to make any more of it. The boss told him he'd better do it or he'd be fired. And my father answered, "You can't fire me because I just quit." He came home that day without a job, but with his integrity intact. He was highly respected in his field, and he wasn't out of work for long. He valued what he felt actually mattered over what was merely convenient, and I believe being raised with this ethic empowered me years later in the workplace. The newly hired head of the nonprofit I had loved working for held a get-together meeting. He was kind of a smarmy guy, but I was willing to give him a chance. Partway through the meeting, he looked around, saw I was the only woman in the room, and politely told me to go and make some coffee. I gave notice the next day. He was astonished that I was not leaving with another job in place. At this point, I wasn't self-confident enough to give him the reason. I wish I had, but you can't go back. I simply told him that I needed to do what I felt was right. And thus arose another example of his ability to find a novel solution to a problem. He'd recently bought a new car up here when he was visiting me and my sister in Portland, and he'd loved not having to pay any sales tax. But back in California, he found out that the law said you had to have at least 5,000 miles on the odometer before it could be registered legally. He told me on the phone one morning that this was really bothering him a lot. It was making him very nervous every time he saw a police car. So I'm half jokingly, sort of, I told him, well, I'd just quit my job and would gladly drive his car around till it was legal. He loved this adventurous suggestion, and 2 weeks later, I took off with his car, his credit card, and his blessings. I drove around the Four Corners area for 6 weeks, visiting lots of national parks. And looking back, another thing I wish I could change, but I can't. I'm sure my mother was incredibly worried with her high-spirited, impulsive, and sometimes impractical youngest child driving around by herself and going who knew where. But I wasn't sensitive enough to acknowledge it, But I did come back safe and sound. The car became legal, and I got another job. We always had cats. This is my father with his cat, Fizz. Another of our cats was this sweet guy, a tuxedo we named Dichotomy, which morphed into Cotty. One afternoon, my father noticed how Cotty would immediately run around the side of the house when he was put to the kitchen door, when he was put out the patio door. So we set up an experiment to see if it could be repeated, and we timed Cotty on this strange little journey at least 15 times. He was a strange little cat. I have the paper in my files somewhere to this day because I've heard that timing is everything, and I thought I should keep it just in case. This is me, my father, and Pretty Prolly. It's from 1967 when the Doors had just released their first album, and it was playing everywhere. I heard they were going to play an outdoor concert on Mount Tamalpais, a beautiful spot just north of San Francisco. It was incredibly easy to convince my father that it would be most cool if he drove me and some friends to this important cultural event, and of course stayed to attend it as well. He drove our Corvair to the concert, packed with 6 excited teenage girls on a perfect summer day. The concert was sublime. But what I remember most about that day is being back at the house in our living room, dancing to Light My Fire, my father, me, and 5 of my friends. My mother didn't dance, but she sat in her chair, tapping her toe and smiling. My father is listed as probably the first man to catch a Frisbee in a book on a subject, a book which I own and could not find. The exact moment the first Frisbee was caught will never be known, but I do know for a fact that my father played a huge part in bringing it to Middlebury College in Vermont. It was September 12th, 1939. He and 3 of his Delta Epsilon brothers got a flat tire driving back from a fraternity event in Nebraska. The road cut through seemingly endless fields of corn, and my father and his buddy, Hog Gale, decided to run between the rows of corn while the other 2 changed the tire. It doesn't take 4 people to change a tire. So after a bit of silly, crop-damaging fun, Hog yells out, "Mole, Frisbee!" and flings a pie pan with Frisbee Company, Bridgeport, Connecticut, stamped on it, straight into my father's hand. They took it back to Middlebury, and the student body embraced it immediately. Studying diminished significantly. After he graduated in 1940, he went to one of the major toy makers of the day. I forget who, but they're still around. You'd know their name. And he told them all about Frisbee and how fun it was to play. They listened politely and then told him they were very sorry, but the American public would never embrace a game where you didn't keep score. He thanked them for their time and left. My family was playing Frisbee before I was born, and we played it for many years. We taught it to lots of people, and we never kept score. He also wrote many heartfelt, often corny, and always rhyming poems. He wrote one called Ode to Ron B. that he wrote to honor finally finding an excellent bank manager. He goes on about what he did for him and how wonderful it was. Well, one year he wrote a poem for each of the family's Christmas gifts. He would put the gift in a paper bag, staple it shut with the poem. This one was for my mother's present of perfumed talc. Margie, take a sturdy stance. It's time to start the powder dance. Swing her high and swing her low, and soon the John is white as snow. We had similar senses of humor, and he always encouraged me to do what made me happy, as long as I didn't break laws or hurt anybody. One excellent example of this was my typing fixation. In my high school typing class, I was temporarily obsessed with right-left words, a key on the right, a key on the left. and my entire family endured several weeks of my out-of-control amusement about this. Maybe this was hurting someone. It made them a little crazy, except my father. Looking back on it, maybe it was because letters made sense to me, and numbers never did, and still don't. Remember the cool talk on the chaos theory? You know, I was lost after 1 minute. Anyway, I started with right-left sentences. There were a number of sentences that involved hams. Here's just one. But Heidi did pay for hams. Kind of plaintive. You know, there were a lot about Heidi and the hams, but I finally got tired of those and moved on to, I created 4 first and last names, each one using each finger only once. First came Dormsiak Pexofuzz, an interesting and reasonable sounding name for a secondary character. And then there was Kizoap Spential, not so reasonable, and probably the lovable sidekick who doesn't make it through to the end. And then I went a step further with Palsaduf Tuxope, clearly the leading man. This one was great. It went right to left, moving from the outside of the keyboard on Palsaduf and to the inside out on Tuxope. And finally, the leading lady, the star of my fun with typing phase, Pointessa Axerhilp. Flowing from right to left with Pointessa, using each finger once and traveling back from left to right, again only once. I figured I reached a summit of typing perfection and retired my fixation, no doubt to my family's relief. I was about 27, and I was visiting my parents in Palo Alto, and one day we went out shopping, I went out shopping with my father for a new toilet. We perused the stock, looked at features, made a purchase. The mission was accomplished. We got in the car, buckled up, and were about to drive off when I cried out, "My pen!" I just discovered that my psychedelic plastic pin was no longer on my blouse. I loved this pin, and I started crying. Did he tell me to knock it off? To grow up and stop being such a crybaby about a silly pin? Heck no! He said, "Let's go find it." And we did. My parents reached their golden anniversary. There was a big family dinner and a big party back at the house with friends and relatives and food and music and happiness. The full sheet cake was decorated with frosting swirls, flowers, the years of their marriage, and their names. And my intense, honest, and very patient mother had the bakery ad in the center of the cake in elegant frosting cursive, 50 years is a long time. In conclusion, my father's low bar for amusement, his high bar for ethics, his compassion, and his genuine kindness influenced me more than I can express in this presentation. His actions and beliefs had a significant part in the development of my faith in the goodness and ultimate potential of all living beings, and in my celebration of the humor in this life, in which I indulge as often as possible. I wear the aforementioned pin today in his honor. Thank you.